He looked like nothing more than a shepherd boy from some remote border village. But when a terrifying beast charged right at him, there wasn't even a trace of fear on his face. He simply snapped the long whip in his hand, and in the very next instant, that brutal beast dropped dead on the spot. It all started when he was 10 years old, the year he first discovered that he possessed a strange power. Back then, he had rushed to tell his mother that he could make pieces of wood float through the air, and not only that, he could also create fire and stir the wind. But the moment his mother heard those words, she lost her temper with him. It was the first time he had ever seen her angry, and it was also the last. Once her anger slowly faded, she called him over and told him she wanted to have a serious talk. She asked him whether he wanted to keep living by her side. If he did, then from that day on, he had to promise never to use that power again and never let anyone else find out about it. When he asked why, his mother asked whether he still remembered the stories about nobles and knights. He told her of course he did. Then she explained that whether one was a noble or a knight, anyone born with that special power would be called a wizard. But nobles and knights were not the same by nature. The nobles were descendants of the sacred Freya people, who had descended upon the world to save humanity in the old age. Knights, on the other hand, were descendants of those nobles whose blood had mixed with that of humans. That was why, even among wizards, nobles and knights were always treated as two different kinds. So what she needed him to understand was exactly why he could never use that power. Because what he had inherited was his father's power as a knight. And beyond this little town, there were many evil nobles who saw knights as nothing more than a power to seize and exploit. So he had to remember this. Under no circumstances could anyone find out that he was a wizard. He could promise her that, right? From that day forward, 8 whole years passed, and he never once broke the promise he had made to his mother. But one day, a young villager came to an elder and said that a monster had recently been showing up near the edge of the village. A creature wrapped in pitch-black shadows, shaped like a giant cat the size of a house, leaving the villagers terrified. Still, the village chief had already gone into the city to bring back a wizard. And once the wizard arrived, that monster would surely be dealt with. Hearing that, the elder warned them to be careful. Without a wizard, killing a monster like that was nearly impossible. The young man then said that the villagers had already warned everyone else, except for one person. That left the elder puzzled. Who exactly was this person they had not told? The young man finally gave the answer. The shepherd living on Mount West Cicero, Turan. At that very moment, Turan was lying on a patch of emerald grass, staring up at the pale blue sky in utter boredom. The same scenery, the same life day after day. And if things kept going like this, he felt like he might even forget how to talk. Just as a headache started creeping in, a voice suddenly drifted over. "You poor brat. The sun's not even down yet, and you're already lazing around here?" The moment Turan saw who it was, he told the man to get out of the way and stop blocking his sunlight. The other man immediately got annoyed and snapped back, asking whether Turan was still holding a grudge over what happened back then. Turan shot him a cold look and asked, "You mean the time after my mother died, when you kept circling around, trying to quietly turn my sheep into public property?" Hearing that, the man gave a dry cough or two, but offered no defense. So Turan kept talking. If that was what the man meant, then yes, he was right. But Turan was nowhere near generous enough to hand over the property his mother left behind, and the two of them were nowhere near close enough to exchange friendly greetings. So what exactly did you come here for? If you're done talking, then get lost. Those words clearly stirred up the man's anger, and he almost snapped back on the spot. But the moment he met Turan's cold eyes, every word got stuck in his throat. In the end, he could only look away and avoid Turan's gaze. Then he explained that a monster had appeared near the village, supposedly a leopard the size of a house, and the first person to spot it had been ROP. Turan showed no fear at all when he heard that. He merely reached out and stroked the lamb in front of him, then said flatly, "That really is a problem." Seeing how calm he was, the man looked confused instead. "You're seriously not scared? If that monster starts hunting around here, the one most likely to get targeted is you. I honestly don't know where you get that nerve from. But anyway, the village chief has already gone to the city's guard office. You'd better be careful. I only came here because I was worried about you." The moment he finished speaking, Turan tore right through the lie. He said the man was being far too dishonest, and that he should have just admitted he was worried about the sheep, not about him. "Since you've said what you came to say, then get out already. Your breath reeks so badly that staying here any longer would only pollute the air." That jab left the old man seething. In the end, he could only turn around in frustration and stomp back the way he came. In this world, the only creatures that could truly be called monsters were beasts that possessed mysterious powers and magic. If humanity had wizards, then the wild had monsters. And now, a wizard was actually coming all the way to this miserable backwater because of one of those creatures. At last, Turan might get to see a real wizard with his own eyes. But if the wizard being brought here was just someone the village chief managed to scrape together, then they probably wouldn't be anyone especially remarkable. Even so, Turan still wanted to see what a wizard was really like. At that exact moment, his sharp nose suddenly caught something strange in the air, the smell of blood. In the next instant, Turan followed that scent without hesitation. And when he reached its source, he found that the old man he had just been talking to was already dead. So the fool had come all the way here to warn him, only to get attacked first himself. From the state of the corpse, this clearly wasn't the work of an ordinary beast, which meant the killer had to be the monster the old man had just mentioned. Right then, Turan sensed movement in the surroundings, and as that disturbance drew closer and closer, he finally laid eyes on the thing the old man had described earlier. It was a monstrous leopard-like beast as huge as a house. At the same time, back in the village, a child nervously asked his father whether the adults really couldn't defeat that monster. His father answered in a heavy voice that they couldn't. If ordinary people like them rushed in recklessly, there wouldn't even be bones left to collect. That only made the child more worried, and he quickly asked what would happen to their village now. His father gently reassured him, "Don't worry. The village chief will bring back a wizard, and wizards can subdue monsters like that." But the child still asked in confusion, "Can a wizard really defeat that monster for sure?" His father answered with absolute certainty, "Of course. Wizards are born with magic, and sometimes all it takes is a single word from them to wipe out terrifying monsters like that." And at that very moment, Turan was quietly staring at the savage, violent beast before him, and he softly muttered a single sentence. And in the next heartbeat, the violent beast suddenly recoiled several meters backward, because in that brief instant, it had sensed the aura of a true predator coming from Turan. Staring at the violent beast's reaction, Turan muttered under his breath, "So it doesn't work anymore." In the very next second, the violent beast lunged at him again with savage force, and Turan instantly shouted, "Stop!" But the beast only got shaken back a few meters by the roar, which made it obvious that the command had truly lost its effect. Otherwise, how could it fail to stop at all? Right then, the violent beast swung one massive claw down at Turan with crushing force, the golden markings across its face making it look even more ferocious. But before that claw could slam down, Turan had already slipped away to another spot, and watching how vicious the monster was, he let out a faint sigh. If that was the case, then he would have to use the method a shepherd was supposed to use. The beast saw Turan take that stance and immediately tensed up, ready to spring again at any moment. While Turan looked at the stone in his left hand and quietly spoke a single word, "Lightning." Then he wrapped that stone tightly with a long whip in his right hand, and at the same time, a brilliant golden glow burst from his eyes. After that, Turan snapped the whip in his hand, stepping forward hard with one leg, as he spat out another word, "Pierce." The instant the whip lashed out, the stone shot forward like a cannon shell, tearing straight toward the savage, violent beast. A loud bang exploded through the air. The stone only grazed past the beast's ear, spraying a burst of blood into the air. That single hit sent it into a frenzy. Filled with rage, it unleashed all its claws and charged at Turan like a mad predator. But the truth was, Turan had never been aiming for its ear in the first place. He had been aiming for its skull. And then, in the very next instant, the stone abruptly curved back and punched straight through the beast's head. Looking at the monster, now lying dead on the ground, Turan murmured to himself that this was the first time he had ever used that ability on a monster. But now the real question was where exactly he was supposed to dump this thing. At that thought, he could not help grumbling that the idiots in the village really were a non-stop headache. After dealing with everything, Turan returned to his home on the mountain. Because of the promise he had made to his mother, he had never told anyone he was a wizard, nor had he ever used that power in front of the public. But just as he was about to rest, his door was suddenly pounded in a frantic rush. "Turan, Turan." The man outside kept banging on the door while shouting his name at the top of his lungs. The moment Turan opened the door, he was met by a group of villagers glaring at him with open hostility. It turned out they were there to question him about the old man who had gone looking for him earlier. Turan merely let out a lazy yawn, then asked indifferently, "What? Are you people trying to say that Labus was killed by me?" But before he could even finish, the burly man at the front grabbed him by the collar, staring him down as he snarled, "Yeah, you damn bastard. You hurt that innocent old man, then tossed him out to feed the monster." After hearing the accusation, Turan fell silent for a moment. Then he finally spoke, saying that he knew exactly why they were so desperate to pin everything on him. They were too scared to fight those monsters, so they chose to run from it instead. And because of that cowardice, the oldest man in the village ended up getting dragged into it and killed. Now, they were only afraid other adults would call them cowards, so they were trying to dump the blame on him. The burly man flew into a rage the moment he heard that, throwing a punch as if he wanted to beat Turan senseless. But Turan simply shifted to the side and dodged the blow with effortless ease. To Turan, magic had always been the easiest way to solve a problem, because whenever he strongly wished for something to happen, that wish could be made real at the cost of magical power. So, when he quietly muttered a single word, "trip," someone in the crowd immediately stumbled and crashed to the ground. Truthfully, dealing with people like this did not require fire magic or some overwhelming attack. Just a subtle bit of power was more than enough. That way, they would not die, and he could still crush them completely with absolute control. That was exactly why Turan had hidden the fact that he was a wizard for the past 8 years. Looking at the villagers now sprawled all over the ground, Turan let out a long sigh and said they ought to save their strength for attending Labis's funeral instead of making a scene here. Then he turned toward another group of women nearby and coldly asked, "Did you come to fight too?" The women hurriedly waved their hands and explained that it was not like that at all. They had not come to cause trouble. They had only come to check on him. Hearing that, Turan went quiet for a second before telling them to drag these idiots back where they belonged. Once all that annoyance had finally been dealt with, Turan prepared to take off his clothes and get some rest. He knew perfectly well that what had just happened would throw the village into chaos again, because those people would absolutely use it as an excuse to squeeze him during the next trade. But Turan did not really care. He could always beat them down until they offered a fair price. Right then, a voice suddenly cut through his thoughts, and Turan could not help muttering under his breath, "Have those idiots lost their minds? Are they already back for more trouble?" He strode over and pulled open the door, ready to tear into whoever was outside, only to find that the person standing there was actually a middle-aged man he had never seen before. Turan narrowed his eyes and asked who he was. After a brief pause, the man politely said that he was sorry for the sudden intrusion. He had been hoping to ask Turan for help during his travels, but judging from the current situation, it seemed he had arrived at a bad time. When Turan heard that the man was a wanderer, he fell silent for a moment, then gave a brief apology, explaining that he had just driven away a few unwelcome visitors and had mistaken him for them coming back again. The polite words he used were things his mother had taught him long ago. But because of that miserable village, Turan had almost never spoken properly to anyone, so saying those words out loud now made him feel strangely awkward. Studying the man's clothes, Turan could not help feeling puzzled. Why would a wandering man carrying a sword come all the way to a remote little town like this? So he asked whether the man was looking for an inn. But the moment the question left his mouth, Turan heard a loud growl coming from the man's stomach. That made Turan let out a sigh, and in the end, he reluctantly opened the door wider and let him inside. After preparing some food for him, Turan said that his home was not exactly wealthy, so there was not much worth serving. The middle-aged man stuffed food into his mouth as fast as he could while praising the meal, saying that for him, this already counted as a feast. Then the middle-aged man asked Turan whether he had really never met anyone from outside the village before. Hearing that, Turan answered that he had grown up on this mountain since childhood, making his living as a shepherd, and that this little rural town rarely saw any outsiders to begin with. That answer made the man lift his eyes and look at Turan again, finding him even more interesting. Because for a shepherd who had been born and raised in a place like this, Turan's manners were surprisingly polished. So the man could not help praising him, saying that Turan's parents must have raised him very well. Turan calmly replied that all of that had been taught to him by his mother, but she had passed away a few years ago. Hearing that, the man showed a trace of regret and made a brief gesture of prayer, saying that a mother who had raised a proud son like Turan would surely be proud of him in heaven. After that, he thanked Turan once more, but Turan only said that he was simply living the way his mother had taught him to live. Then, driven by curiosity, Turan asked why the man had come all the way to such a remote little village. The man answered that someone had asked for his help, to deal with a monster that looked like a leopard. The moment Turan heard that, his whole body stiffened for an instant, and he immediately asked whether this man was the wizard the village chief had mentioned. The man did not deny it, but instead nodded and admitted it plainly. Yes, he was that wizard. Then he politely asked whether he could ask Turan a question. Turan did not hesitate for long before agreeing. So the man explained that he could clearly sense the monster's presence somewhere in this area. Yet even now, he still had not actually found the creature itself. And what puzzled him even more was why Tehran, despite already knowing about the village chief and the monster, was still acting so calm and had not tried to run away. If that monster really intended to attack humans, then Tehran would most likely be its first target. Was he truly not afraid at all? For a shepherd who had never once left this town, Tehran's composure was far too unusual. He was far too calm, far too brave. So who exactly was he? Could he be a wizard too? Those words made Tehran remember the days when his mother was still alive. Back then, he had once asked her why no one could ever be allowed to learn that he was a wizard. And his mother had told him that it was all because of those evil nobles. If nobles were compared to shepherds like them, then knights were like hounds raised by those shepherds. They might love you the way they loved family, but when the time came, they could still sell you off or sacrifice you without hesitation. That was why his mother never wanted Tehran to live that kind of life. She had once told him that if he wanted to keep living by her side like that, then he had to remember one thing above all else. He could never let anyone know he was a wizard, especially not other wizards. Because once they found out the truth, they would tear mother and son apart, then turn Tehran into a sheepdog that belonged to them, only to throw him away when he was no longer needed. And to keep from being recognized as a wizard, Tehran might one day have no choice but to kill. At that moment, the man spoke up again, asking Tehran why he had stopped answering. He awkwardly scratched the back of his head and said with a small laugh, "Had that joke just now gone a little too far?" Tehran stayed quiet for a moment before apologizing first, saying that he simply did not have much of a sense of humor. But the man shook his head and said that the one who really ought to apologize was him, because that joke had indeed crossed the line a little. Hearing that, Tehran finally showed a faint smile and said that it was simply the first time he had ever heard a wizard make a joke, so he had been caught off guard. The man laughed and replied that Tehran's reaction had just been too good, so he could not resist teasing him a little, though now it seemed he really had taken it too far. After saying that, he held out his hand to Tehran and said that after talking for so long, they had still not properly introduced themselves. It was a pleasure to meet him. His name was Karen, and he was a wanderer. Then Tehran reached out and shook his hand as well. He introduced himself by saying that his name was Tehran, that he was a shepherd, and that he was 18 years old. After hearing Tehran's age, Karen smiled and told him that he himself was already 75. That caught Tehran off guard, and he asked how that could be since Karen did not look nearly that old. Karen explained that wizards lived longer than ordinary people, and they also aged much more slowly. Then Tehran asked him why he had become a wanderer. Karen answered that he had served the House of Albion for a full 60 years before finally deciding to leave, wanting only to spend his later years wandering from place to place without settling down anywhere. And just like that, the two of them slowly began to share pieces of their own stories. It was the first truly pleasant conversation Tehran had ever had with another person since the day he was born. In the blink of an eye, evening arrived. Karen rose to his feet and said it was about time for him to leave. Then he placed a silver coin on the table and told Tehran that it was an Albion silver coin, one of the purest kinds in circulation, and more than enough to cover the meal. Seeing that, Tehran stood up as well, thanked him, and wished him luck with the hunt. When Karen reached the doorway, he turned back with a grin and told Tehran that he would probably still be staying around for the next few days, so he might end up coming back to mooch a few more meals. A few days later, Tehran went out to graze the flock just like always. After they had eaten their fill, he raised his voice and called out, "Gather!" At once, the sheep all around him lifted their heads and began moving toward Tehran in a cluster. And Tehran still found himself in a good mood because of the conversations they had shared over the past few days. It had been the first time he had ever met a wizard, and also the first time he had ever enjoyed talking to someone that much. Karen always carried an easy sense of humor in the way he spoke, and the polish in his words and manners far surpassed the crude adults in the village. And after spending these days with him, Tehran had gradually realized that Karen truly was a good man. For most of his life, Tehran had believed that knights were nothing more than emotionless hounds raised by arrogant nobles. That was exactly why he still did not know how to tell Karen that there was no longer any monster left on Mount Cicero. At the same time, Karen was still searching for traces of that monster. What troubled him was this. The marks of a fierce battle were clearly still there, yet he could not sense even the slightest trace of the monster's presence. Had the creature already been hunted down? But if so, who had done it? Or had the village chief secretly handed the matter off to another wizard besides him? Still, that thought actually made Karen breathe a little easier, because he did not care who had killed the monster. What mattered most was that this place had become safe again. But right then, he suddenly sensed something and instantly turned to look behind him. In the next second, a razor-sharp claw flashed right in front of his eyes, and the owner of that claw was a hideous monster. A massive wound had split open across its skull, and around that gash, rows of tiny jagged fangs had begun to grow. The sight made Karen frown, wondering who could have done something like this and twisted a monster into such a grotesque state. Before he could fully sort through the thought, the creature's claw came stabbing straight at him, and with a thunderous bang, it smashed down exactly where he had been standing. Karen's expression darkened as he wondered why the wizard who had killed this monster had not absorbed or dispersed the magical power left inside the corpse. A wizard capable of killing a monster should have known better than that. So why would anyone just leave the corpse behind and allow it to become a wraith? Or had the one who struck it down merely been a rookie knight who did not know that failing to absorb the magic in a corpse would cause it to turn into a wraith? Or perhaps the person responsible had some other motive altogether. But no matter what the truth was, he had to destroy this thing first. In the next instant, a golden arrow formed in Karen's hand and shot toward the monster like a streak of light. But the moment that golden arrow struck the creature, it shattered into dust on impact. That result left Karen stunned. His magic had no effect. Could the monster's magical power really have surpassed us by that much? Then, in the very next second, the monster vanished from sight, disappearing completely from in front of Karen's eyes, leaving him to sweep his gaze across the area in search of wherever it had gone. At that moment, strange bubbles began rising from the shadow beneath Karen's feet. Then, without warning, a vicious claw shot out from the darkness under him. Fortunately, Karen reacted in time just before the strike landed, but when he looked down at the wound on his hand, a wave of shock still hit him hard. This was not the kind of monster a mere knight could handle. At the very least, it would take a lower-ranking noble to stand a real chance against it. He had never imagined that a monster of this level would appear in a remote mountain village like this. Life around wraiths really was full of surprises. Karen lowered his head slightly, his mind racing, because he had no intention of dying here without a fight. If death was coming, then he would drag that creature down with him. So he gathered every last bit of magical power into his palm, planning to pierce the monster's weak point the instant it lunged again. And the moment that claw came out once more, he would unleash the strongest attack he had. But right at that life or death moment, a streak of blue light suddenly flashed through the forest. And in the very next second, it pierced straight through the monster's skull. Karen stared at the scene in stunned disbelief, because that monster, the one that had felt almost impossible to overcome, had just been killed in an instant. Then a voice reached his ears, asking, "Are you all right?" When Karen looked up and saw who it was, he let out a bitter laugh and said that the idea of a shepherd being a wizard really was one terrifying joke. "So, Tehran, are you really a wizard?" Tehran calmly nodded as he reeled in the whip in his hand and admitted the truth. That only made Karen wonder even more why Tehran had not told him sooner. When Tehran stayed silent, Karen changed the question and asked why Tehran had chosen to save him just now, when he could have simply walked away. Tehran only muttered under his breath, "Maybe it was because I'm kind." And that answer made him remember the conversation they had shared before. Back then, Tehran had asked Karen why he went this far for people like these. With Karen's ability, he could have earned far more money, far more easily elsewhere. So why had he agreed to come all the way here and hunt a monster for the village chief? Karen had laughed out loud at that and said those people were just pitiful souls living in a place this remote, without even the most basic protection. How could anyone not call them pitiable? Tehran had replied that none of that sounded like Karen's fault, but Karen answered that wizards were born inheriting the power of the gods, so they should also protect villagers who had no strength to defend themselves. Not every wizard thought the way he did, of course, but in his eyes, every person ought to have a belief of their own and a way of life they chose for themselves. And now, Tehran quietly repeated those same words. Every person ought to have their own beliefs and their own way of living. But at that very moment, the monster that had already collapsed on the ground suddenly sprang back up and attacked them again. After the two of them dodged that strike, Karen immediately told Tehran to listen carefully, because this thing was not something they could handle head-on. Unless someone was of noble rank, there was no way to truly fight a monster like this. So Tehran had to go inform the village chief and get the villagers evacuated at once, while Karen stayed behind to hold the creature off. Even though Karen knew full well he had just been talking big and had no idea how long he could really last, he still chose to stand his ground. But then Tehran simply said, "It's all right." And the instant those words fell, magical power surged violently through his body. Kieran's eyes widened in disbelief. Did that mean the strike Turan used earlier had not even been close to his full strength? A young knight hidden away in the mountains was capable of killing a wraith that even nobles had to face with caution. That was the thought now pounding through old knight Kieran's mind. Because what stood before him was not the empty bluff of some country boy, nor the reckless bravado of a young knight fleeing from noble pursuit. What Kieran was witnessing might very well be the beginning of something that could overturn the entire world of wizards. As that thought hit him, the stones scattered across the ground around them slowly began to rise into the air under the pull of Turan's magic. And in that very moment, Turan himself burned with one overwhelming desire: to find out exactly where his limit lay. At Turan's side, Kieran did not hesitate for even a second and declared that there was no way he would allow Turan to fight alone. Because no matter how extraordinary Turan's talent might be, that thing was still an enemy far too troublesome to take lightly. So the only way to deal with it was for the two of them to fight together. But in the next instant, with a thunderous bang, Kieran immediately realized that, in his current state, he would only get in the way, because when that last attack came, he had not even been able to react. Knowing full well that he could not truly help anymore, Kieran made a major decision. And that was to place this battle in Turan's hands and let his talent fully bloom here and now. While Kieran kept dodging the Wraith's attacks, he shouted to Turan that a Wraith could not be killed through ordinary physical force. That only made Turan ask what exactly he was supposed to do, and Kieran immediately answered, "Fire," or lightning. The moment those words fell, Turan instantly gathered a blaze directly onto the Wraith's body. But the attack produced no real effect at all, and Turan frowned at once and said that this clearly would not work. At that moment, Kieran finally realized that Turan did not even know the most basic common sense of a wizard. And that sparked a thought in Kieran's mind. Could it be that this wraith had been born from the very monster Turan killed with his own hands? If that were true, then it meant Turan had gone his entire life without ever absorbing magical power, even once. Kieran quickly told him not to attack directly for now, but to first condense the flames and then fire them outward. The instant Turan heard that, he formed a small fireball in the palm of his hand. Then he lifted his hand toward the sky, and the little fireball began spinning wildly at once. After that, he stepped forward with his left foot and hurled the fireball toward the monster with his right hand. A violent explosion rang out, and in the very next second, raging flames swallowed the monster's entire body whole. When Kieran saw that, he immediately roared at Turan not to let up, saying that he had to keep pouring magical power into the flames and burn every last trace of the wraith to ashes. Hearing that, Turan followed his instructions at once and kept the inferno in front of him burning without pause. Only after seeing that did Kieran finally let out a long breath of relief. They had won. That powerful wraith, the kind that should have required noble-level strength to overcome, had just been destroyed by a shepherd boy from a remote mountain village. Right after that, Kieran urged Turan to absorb the remaining magical power inside the creature at once if he did not want to face lingering resentment like this again in the future. Turan immediately asked how he was supposed to do that. Kieran told him to stand in front of the monster's corpse first, and then imagine that he was slowly drawing some invisible thing into his own body. As Turan slowly closed his eyes and focused on that image in his mind, a green glow began to emerge from the monster's remains. That glow slowly flowed toward Turan's palm, and the instant Turan opened his eyes again, he could clearly feel a strange, new force pouring into every part of his body. From behind him, Kieran asked whether Turan could feel a kind of pleasure rising from deep within his body. Kieran admitted that if he had not witnessed it with his own eyes, he never would have believed that this was truly Turan's first time absorbing magical power. Although magical power would slowly grow with age after a person's first awakening, the best way to increase it quickly was still to hunt monsters or magical beasts and absorb the power within them. That was exactly why Kieran found this so unbelievable. Because Turan had managed to wield magic at that level without ever absorbing magical power before, making Kieran realize that Turan's talent and potential were likely far more terrifying than he had first imagined. Then Kieran softly called Turan's name, Turan. After that, he seriously said that he owed Turan an apology for the prejudice in his earlier gaze, and that he also wanted to know one thing: what family Turan actually came from. The word family left Turan puzzled for a moment. Even so, he still reminded Kieran that before anything else, he ought to deal with his wound first. At Turan's reminder, Kieran finally snapped back to the fact that his arm was still sizzling with smoke. After they returned to the house, Turan carefully wrapped the injury for him. That only left Karen even more confused, unable to understand why someone like Turan would personally do something like this for him. Turan could only answer with helpless patience that he had already said this many times. He was not some noble or exalted figure. He was just a shepherd who did not even know who his father was. So, Karen needed to stop saying things like that. When Karen saw the way Turan stared straight at him, he finally gave a slow nod of agreement. But even then, he still could not help wondering why a wizard as powerful as Turan had chosen to live as a shepherd. He was not trying to belittle him. He simply felt that a life like that did not suit Turan at all. Turan told him that this had been his mother's final wish. She had wanted him to live that way, and even at the end of her life, she had never changed her mind. That left Karen visibly surprised, unable to understand why Turan's mother would leave behind such words. So Turan explained, word for word, the things his mother had once taught him. After hearing it all, Karen said that Turan's mother had actually made a very wise decision. That took Turan by surprise, because he had thought Karen would call it nothing more than overprotection. But Karen seriously told him that it was not like that at all. Wizards might possess great power, but power itself inevitably drew conflict. More than 20 years ago, a brutal war had broken out between several noble houses. Back then, the House of Albion, the family Karen once served, had gone to war with House Asher. Countless people died in that conflict, and out of the more than 3,000 Albion knights who entered that war, over 900 never came back. What was even crueler was that every person Karen had cared about was among those dead. One of his friends used to say that once the war ended, he would open a laundry shop. His teacher had always scolded him, saying he still had too much left to learn. And as for the wife and son he loved so deeply, they were slaughtered by House Asher as well. In the end, Karen alone was left alive. So in a way, Turan's mother had not been wrong. Sometimes the lives of knights vanished more easily and more meaninglessly than those of ordinary people. But there was one thing she had misjudged, and that was Turan's talent. Although Karen admitted that saying this in his current condition might sound a little like boasting, the truth was that he had once been a highly skilled knight. Yet when he compared himself to Turan, someone who had never absorbed magical power before, he suddenly felt like he was nothing at all. So Turan ought to understand now just how extraordinary his talent truly was. At the very least, it was the level of talent one would expect from the nobility, and even among nobles, Turan's gifts would still count as first-rate. That realization startled Turan. Did that mean his father might not have been a knight after all? Hearing that, Karen slowly rose to his feet and explained that, in very rare cases, nobles could produce children whose gifts were worse than those of knights, while knights could also give birth to children with noble-level potential. So, in Karen's view, Turan would be better off leaving this place and seeing the world beyond the mountain for himself. Turan asked why. Karen answered that humanity needed more truly powerful nobles, because the truth was that mankind still had not fully taken control of this world. Long ago, there had been other beings cast out by the gods, and even now they were still waiting for a chance to rise again. Yet the nobles of today cared only about tearing each other apart. That was exactly why this age needed someone like Turan to step forward, someone both powerful and kind. But more than anything else, Karen said, Turan himself was clearly no longer satisfied with living the life of a shepherd. Was he? Those words left Turan silent for a while, before he finally asked what he could actually gain if he truly chose to go down the mountain. Karen smiled and said that depended entirely on what Turan wanted. Wealth, fame, power, family, or friendship, were those not all things that were nearly impossible to find in a place like this? Karen continued by telling him to imagine a life like his, traveling far and wide, destroying the monsters that threatened humanity, or becoming an adventurer who chased the unknown, or even being taken in by some powerful house and walking down the road toward authority. Only then did it feel as if something finally clicked inside Turan, because all those things really did sound far more interesting than staying here and herding sheep forever. In a quiet voice, Turan said thank you. Karen had become the first person to ever make him truly curious about the world below the mountain. After hearing Turan's answer, Karen told him that no matter what path he ultimately chose, he would support it. Then he asked Turan what exactly his bloodline ability was. But when he saw the blank confusion on Turan's face, Karen suddenly let out a helpless laugh and apologized, saying that he kept forgetting Turan still knew almost nothing about magic. He then explained that a bloodline ability was a special trait inherited by nobles from their Freya ancestors. In fact, whether someone possessed a bloodline ability was one of the key standards used to distinguish nobles from knights. As he spoke, Karen gathered a small fireball in the palm of his hand and asked Turan whether, when using magic, he had ever felt that certain spells came unnaturally easily to him, or whether he had shown some especially unusual ability. Hearing that, Turan began seriously searching through his memories for anything that fit what Karen had described. Then he told Karen that his sense of smell was exceptionally sharp, and that whenever he threw stones, his aim was frighteningly precise. Karen replied that if Turan's sense of smell truly was that extraordinary, then it could indeed be a bloodline ability. As for accurate thrown weapons, that was also one of the more common talents associated with House Albion, though it was not especially rare on its own. After that, Karen pressed him for even more details, and Turan told him everything he knew without holding anything back. But when Karen finished listening, his expression turned noticeably strange, and Turan could not help asking what was wrong. After a short silence, Karen slowly said that he thought he might know which family Turan's bloodline was closest to. The moment he heard that, Turan urged him to continue. Karen then told him that it was once a mighty and distinguished house, a family known as the Pursuers or the Hunters, House Zasher. And that was the very family that had once waged bloody war against House Albion. Those words froze Turan where he stood. He had never imagined that his bloodline could be so closely tied to House Zasher, the same house that had wiped out all of Karen's loved ones, and that his own origin might trace back to them. For a moment, Turan had no idea what he should even say to Karen. Should he apologize? But those people were still blood relatives he had never met, and to Turan, they were almost no different from strangers. Then at that moment, Karen softly called his name, Turan. He calmly told him that he did not need to look so troubled, because he had not personally taken part in that war. Even though Turan understood what Karen meant, he still did not know how to answer him. Karen simply showed that same gentle smile again and said that this was the burden adults carried. If people kept trying to answer blood with blood and hatred with hatred, then conflict would never end. Hearing that, Turan could not help asking whether Karen truly felt no regret at all about the fact that he wanted to leave the mountain. Karen only patted him lightly on the shoulder and said that if Turan really did go down the mountain and begin pursuing power and influence, then yes, it was very likely that he would eventually join House Zasher. After all, his talent was simply too extraordinary. But Karen said he trusted Turan's character, because Turan had once saved him even at the cost of exposing an identity he had intended to hide for his entire life. So in Karen's eyes, if someone like Turan truly entered House Zasher and eventually rose to a position of power within it, then perhaps he might actually be the one who could prevent a terrible war like that from ever happening again. Still, Karen told him that there was no need to force himself to think about all of that right now, because Turan had not yet truly decided whether he would join House Zasher at all. At that point, Turan quietly said that maybe he had already made up his mind. He wanted to try going down the mountain, but not yet. He said that he would only leave after Karen's injuries had healed. Karen smiled and said they were nothing more than scratches, though in the end, he did not refuse Turan's kindness. Those words stirred something deep inside Turan, and afterward, he invited Karen to stay here and recover first. Once the wounds healed, they could go down the mountain together. And so, in the days that followed, Karen began teaching Turan the most basic principles of magic every single day. He told him that to use magic, one first had to possess magical power, and that magical power was the master key that opened every door to magic. But even that key came in different kinds, and if one wished to use a certain kind of magic, then one had to possess the kind of magical power that matched it. Hearing that, Turan pressed further and asked what exactly the standard for compatibility meant. Karen then explained that whether magic was compatible or not was mainly determined by three major factors: bloodline, affinity, and causality. The first, bloodline, depended on the inheritance one was born with, and this mostly applied to nobles who were not of knightly origin. For example, Karen said that a wound like his would probably be extremely difficult for Turan to heal, right? But for someone from the south with La Vista blood, healing something like that could be done with ease even without formal training. That was the power granted by bloodline itself. After hearing that, Turan immediately asked what the second factor, affinity, meant. Karen slowly rose to his feet and told him that affinity could basically be understood as a kind of proficiency. As for the last factor, and the most important one, causality, that was something even Karen himself had never fully understood. He then asked Turan what would happen if he tried to kill someone directly with magical power. After thinking for a moment, Turan answered that maybe there would just be a little flash above his head, and then nothing else would happen. Hearing that, Karen gently placed his hand on the cup sitting on the table and said that this was exactly what happened when causality was missing. If the desired result had no fitting cause behind it, or if the goal itself was too difficult to achieve, then that kind of failure would appear. That explanation suddenly made everything click for Tehran, and he said that he thought he was finally beginning to understand what causality really meant. For example, if Tehran wanted to kill Karen, then instead of simply spending magical power trying to force the result of death, it would make more sense to provide a concrete cause, such as burning Karen to death with fire. Was that the idea? Hearing that interpretation, Karen could not help praising him, saying that Tehran had grasped the core of causality astonishingly fast, and that talent like that might truly make him well-suited to becoming a scholar. Right after that, Tehran asked another question. He could control ordinary animals almost at will. So what kind of conditions would be required if he wanted to control magical beasts instead? And so the two of them kept talking. And it was only then that Tehran truly realized just how difficult the study of magic really was. A great wizard had to do more than simply use magical power. He also had to understand the principles behind it, and the situations where each kind of power could actually be applied. Then, as if suddenly remembering something important, Tehran asked Karen whether the Zasher bloodline also possessed some special form of magic. Karen did not hesitate. He answered directly that the Zasher bloodline excelled most at stealth and tracking, and that Tehran could try it right away. So Tehran slowly closed his eyes and began shaping the idea in his mind. No one would be able to see him, and even his voice and scent would no longer be noticed by others. Little by little, Tehran's figure began to fade, until he completely vanished right in front of Karen's eyes. At the sight of that, Karen immediately spoke up and said that Tehran had done it. Now, even Karen himself could no longer see him. After a short while, Tehran's figure slowly appeared again. At the sight of that, Karen could not help sighing in admiration. That ability really was just as frightening as ever. Back in wartime, the Knights of Albion had feared that kind of power more than anything else. But even though it was undeniably powerful, Karen still seriously reminded Tehran that it was by no means invincible. After that, he said he would teach Tehran a few proper ways to train his magic. Hearing that, Tehran could not help asking why Karen would teach so much to a wizard whose bloodline came from an enemy house. Karen simply answered that Tehran had saved his life before and had even treated his wounds. More importantly than that, he trusted Tehran's character. Not long afterward, when the village chief learned that Tehran planned to sell off the flock and leave the village, he was utterly stunned. He demanded to know why Tehran had made such a decision on his own without discussing it with the village first. If Tehran really left, then who was supposed to tend the sheep from now on? Tehran only answered coldly that they could find another shepherd themselves. As for what he did with what belonged to him, that was none of their business. Still, he made one thing clear. He wanted them to buy the sheep at a fair price. Otherwise, he would release the whole flock and walk away. Of course, they were welcome to go chase the animals down again afterward, but it would be far more trouble than they wanted. The village chief knew perfectly well that Tehran always did exactly what he said he would do, and that angering him would bring no good at all. So in the end, he handed over the money. After taking care of that matter, Tehran prepared to leave this place alongside Karen. On the road, Tehran asked whether the villagers still owed Karen a payment for his commission, and whether he should go back and collect it for him. But Karen only smiled and shook his head, saying he had never intended to take that money anyway. Besides, the one who had truly killed the magical beast had not been him, but Tehran. Then Karen calmly said that this was where they should part ways. He apologized for refusing Tehran's offer to travel together, but said he was still more comfortable on his own. Hearing that, Tehran looked at him and said it was all right. He had wanted to properly thank Karen for all his guidance anyway. That brought an easy smile to Karen's face, and he wished Tehran a safe journey. Tehran wished him the same, hoping the two of them would meet again someday. And so the boy stood there, quietly watching Karen's figure fade farther and farther into the distance. Only much later did Tehran truly understand why he had respected that old knight so deeply. For although he had never lacked his mother's love, somewhere deep inside, he had always longed for someone like a father. A few days after parting from Karen, Tehran, traveling alone, arrived at a barren stretch of wasteland with almost no sign of life. Fine grains of sand drifted through the air there, constantly blurring the sight of anyone passing through. It was then that Tehran spotted a group of traveling merchants making their way across the wasteland. So he decided to go over and ask them for directions. After approaching them, Tehran asked how to reach the nearest city. The old man leading the group told him that if he followed the road they had come from and kept going straight. He would eventually reach a city called Murai. After learning that, Turan politely thanked them. But before he had even taken 2 more steps, the group suddenly called out and stopped him. With mocking smiles, they asked, did he really think he could just walk away after asking for information? Was he not going to offer anything in return? The moment those words fell, several of the men around him pulled out their weapons, clearly intending to force Turan to hand over the bulging pack on his back. Seeing that, Turan asked with mild confusion, so, is this a robbery? At that, the leader only sneered and said, and what if it is? This is the wasteland. A few dead bodies do not matter out here. So while they were still willing to speak nicely, Turan had better take off that pack and hand it over. Otherwise, once they killed him and stripped it off his corpse themselves, things would only get bloodier. The moment he heard that, Turan's gaze turned ice cold. Right after that, he found himself recalling the magic lessons he had learned from Karen. Then, instead of getting angry, a faint smile appeared on his face as he looked at them and said, so, is this supposed to be practice for me? That line immediately sent the group into mocking laughter. They sneered and asked if this lunatic really thought he was someone important. But in the very next second, Turan merely raised one hand. In the instant he softly spoke the word wind, the men were hurled straight into the air by a violent gust. Seeing that, a thought flashed through Turan's mind. Karen's teachings really did work. This kind of method truly reduced the cost of magical power. With only the slightest amount of power, he had already managed to whip up a wind this fierce. Then Turan uncapped his water skin and began drawing the water out with magic. After that, he compressed it together and forced it into a solid mass. In the next instant, several sharp icicles appeared around him. The bandits panicked the moment they saw that. But before they could even try to run, the icicles had already pierced straight through their bodies. And just as Turan was about to continue attacking, the bandit leader hurriedly dropped to his knees and begged for mercy, saying that they had not known Turan was a wizard and pleading to be spared. The moment his words fell, several of his men rushed in from the side with weapons in hand, trying to ambush Turan. Turan merely lifted his right foot slightly, then brought it down in one sharp motion, and several chunks of stone instantly shot up from the ground and punched through those men's bodies. That sight left the bandit leader utterly stunned. He stared in disbelief, unable to understand how his men had died so easily. At that point, Turan calmly told him that he still had one question to ask. After the utterly one-sided slaughter that had just taken place, the bandit leader no longer had the slightest will to resist. He could only kneel there and swear that he would answer anything. So Turan asked him why they had attacked without hesitation. Had it really never occurred to them that a lone traveler might also be a wizard like him? The bandit leader hurriedly answered that it was because Turan had bowed his head in thanks. What? Even after they had spoken to him in such a crude and disrespectful way, he had still politely thanked them. That was why they assumed he was nothing more than an ordinary person. Hearing that, Turan actually thanked him again because in a way, he really had learned something useful from this. That immediately rekindled a sliver of hope in the bandit leader's eyes, and he quickly asked whether that meant Turan would spare him. But before he could finish the sentence, he saw droplets of water slowly gathering above his head. Turan was doing this because Karen had once told him that once he truly set out on his journey, he would meet all kinds of people. But when it came to parasites like bandits, mercy was the one thing he must never show, because one life spared out of pity could one day lead to the deaths of 10 or even 100 innocent people. So Turan did not hesitate for even a moment before killing the bandit leader as well. After that, he continued forward along the trail left behind by their cart. The tracks carved through the wasteland slowly faded beneath weeds, sand, and wind. And Turan's once unsettled heart gradually calmed as he remembered Karen's teachings. Then at last he arrived in an entirely new world. The sight before him made astonishment spread across his face. So this was the city called Murai that the bandit leader had spoken of. Looking around, Turan took in everything with the wide-eyed curiosity of a country boy entering a city for the first time. It was the first time he had ever seen so many people gathered in one place, and the buildings around him were nothing like the open wilds of his village. In that unfamiliar environment, Turan suddenly had no idea what his next step was supposed to be. Right then, Turan clearly remembered something Karen had told him before. Karen had said that when arriving somewhere new, if he wanted a place to rest first, he should look for an inn. Whether in a village or a city, there would always be one. So Turan turned and asked the fruit vendor nearby for directions. At first, the vendor politely asked what he wanted to buy. But the moment he realized Turan was not there to buy fruit, his attitude did a complete turn, and he coldly told Turan to get out of the way if he was not spending money. That left Turan genuinely confused. He could not understand why the man had suddenly become so rude. Was there some unwritten city rule that you had to buy fruit before asking a question? So Turan pointed at the fruit on the stall and asked, "How much does this cost?" The moment he pulled out a coin, the vendor's tone softened a little. He looked Turan over and said that he looked like an outsider, so if he had something to ask, he should just ask it. Hearing that, Turan placed a silver coin into the man's palm and asked where he could find an inn. The vendor told him to follow the road behind the stall, then turn left. There he would see a building with a blue roof, which was the largest inn in the city. When Turan arrived at that inn, he was greeted by an employee named Lena, who welcomed him with a smile. Turan asked how much it would cost to stay for one night. With her hands clasped together, Lena happily told him that it would be 16 bits. After hearing the price, Turan paid her the required amount. Then he asked whether there were any bounties nearby, preferably ones that involved hunting monsters. The reason Turan asked was simple. He needed to keep hunting monsters and absorbing the magical power inside them. And according to Karen, taking bounty jobs to hunt monsters was also a decent way to make money. When Lena did not answer right away, Turan asked again. But Lena only smiled and told him, "Sir, there is no such thing as free information in this world." So Turan handed her a few more coins, and only then did she tell him that if he wanted to take bounty jobs, he should go to City Hall. Turan asked what kind of place that was. Lena explained that it was where all kinds of public affairs were handled, and that everyone working there had been hired by the city lord. But since the sun had already gone down, City Hall was probably closed by now. So if Turan wanted to take a monster hunting bounty, he would have to go there tomorrow instead. Right after that, Lena curiously asked whether Turan was a monster hunter too, but Turan had no idea what she meant by that term. Seeing his confusion, Lena explained that there was a rumor going around that if an ordinary person managed to kill a monster, they could become a wizard. Still, in her view, it was probably just another made-up story used to fool people. But right at that moment, a hand suddenly landed on Turan's shoulder. The man behind him said at once that those rumors were not false at all. Ordinary people becoming wizards by killing monsters was absolutely real, and he had seen it with his own eyes. That made Lena stare at him in surprise and blurt out, "Midden, you are still alive?" Midden only laughed and replied that he had already told her before. Until he became a wizard, he was not planning to die. At that, Turan calmly brushed the hand off his shoulder. Then he looked at Midden and seriously asked whether it was really true that an ordinary person could become a wizard by killing a monster. Midden told him that if a wizard wanted to become stronger, then hunting monsters was essential. By the same logic, if an ordinary person succeeded in killing a monster, then they too could become a wizard. He then added that his group of 4 was currently hunting monsters for exactly that reason, to become truly powerful wizards. That made Turan ask whether anyone had already succeeded. Midden snorted and said of course not. In this city, the only real wizards were the Lord and his 3 subordinates. Then Midden looked Turan up and down and asked whether he really intended to hunt monsters with gear like that. It looked far too shabby. Turan did not deny it because Midden was right. The only thing he really had that counted as a weapon was a slingshot, and even that was only suited for firing stones about the size of eggs. Even so, Midden invited Turan to join them, saying their team was short on a ranged fighter, and that if Turan was interested, he could come hunt with them. But Turan refused without a second thought, because he had no reason to go hunting alongside them. Later, after lying down on the bed in his room, Turan began thinking back over everything that had happened that day. The outside world really was even more chaotic than he had imagined. Even now, Turan still found it hard to believe that he had truly left the village behind. But maybe because of that, he found himself even more curious about everything that would happen from here on. Just then, he heard knocking from outside the door. Turan sat up on the bed and called out, "Who is it?" Before parting ways, Karen had warned Turan again and again that even inside an inn, he could never let his guard down because a city was never truly safe. That was why Karen kept repeating the same advice over and over. No matter what happened, Turan had to move carefully. Because of that, Turan did not dare relax in the slightest. While magical power quietly gathered in his left hand, his right hand slowly reached for the door. The moment the door opened, Turan realized that the person standing outside was Lena, the same woman he had met earlier that day. Smiling, she asked whether he was still awake. Then she added that she had been worried the room might get cold at night, so she had come to warm him up a little. That immediately left Turan staring at her in confusion, asking what exactly she meant by that. Lena only smiled wider and said she meant exactly what she was saying. As long as Turan was willing to pay a little, she was willing to do anything. But Turan answered with complete calm that he had no interest in that. Lena laughed and told him not to pretend. Just by looking at his face, she could tell he could not possibly mean that. Yet when she truly lifted her eyes and looked at him carefully, she suddenly realized that Turan was so composed he looked almost like an ascetic in meditation. That left her stunned for a moment. This, too, was one of Karen's warnings. He had told Turan long ago that when dealing with women and inns, he had to be especially careful. Many of them could be carrying diseases. A wizard's body was strong enough that such things might not be a serious problem for the wizard himself. But once infected, he could easily pass that sickness on to another woman later. That was why Karen had warned him again and again not to let desire push him into a choice he would regret. The whole thing only made Turan feel even more strongly that life in a big city was not easy at all. Whether it was the fruit vendor from earlier or Lena now, everything seemed to have a price attached to it. Information, politeness, even conversation itself. It was a place so cold it felt almost suffocating. But right then, Turan's sharp hearing caught voices drifting over from the stairway. One of the men was quietly asking Boss Midden why he had wanted to bring that guy along earlier. To be honest, the man did not look useful at all. Another person beside him chimed in and said the same thing. The guy was pretty arrogant too. Maybe they could have used him as bait for a monster. But Midden shook his head and said that Turan reminded him of his younger self. So when he heard that Turan wanted to hunt monsters with that kind of weapon, he could not help worrying a little. Even if he could not do much for him, at the very least he wanted Turan to survive a little longer. Hearing those words, Turan lay there in silence. And for the first time, he began to feel that maybe this city was not quite as heartless as it first looked. The next day, Turan went to the city hall Lena had mentioned. The worker handling the front desk looked up as Turan approached and asked, "What business do you have?" Turan answered directly that he wanted to hunt monsters and had come to take on a bounty. In truth, Karen had already told him before that. This world would never choose to be kind to anyone on its own, nor did it have any reason to be. If Turan wanted people to treat him well, then the simplest way was to reveal that he was a wizard, because that alone would make most ordinary people lower their heads. After handing Turan the bounty notice, the city hall worker flatly reminded him to return it after reading, rather than trying to keep it. Even though Turan was clearly studying the contents in earnest, the man still looked unconvinced that Turan could truly kill a monster. Even so, he warned him that if he really did kill one, he had to dispose of the corpse properly and never leave it abandoned outside the city. If a wizard failed to disperse the remaining magical power in time, the corpse would turn into a wraith. And under the laws of that city, killing a monster and then leaving the corpse unattended was punishable by the harshest sentence. Truthfully, Turan already knew perfectly well how troublesome a monster became after turning into a wraith, so he had no intention of repeating that mistake. Still, he could not help asking one thing in confusion. Are knights not supposed to hunt monsters too? But the worker only let out a helpless sigh and shot back with a question of his own. Did Turan really think the knights had nothing better to do? Their job was to keep order inside the city. As for the monsters outside the walls, that was supposed to be handled by people like them, the monster hunters. Watching Turan's figure disappear into the distance, the worker even muttered under his breath that it looked like the wilderness would soon have one more corpse in it. Yet before long, Turan came back carrying the very monster from the bounty notice. The sight left that worker completely dumbfounded, his face full of disbelief. He blurted out, "This is impossible. How could Turan bring the creature back so quickly? And did he really kill it alone?" Turan simply nodded in calm acknowledgement, then immediately asked how he was supposed to claim the reward. At that, another worker hurried over to the counter in a panic, saying he would get it right away. Once the bounty for the three-legged crow was processed, the reward money was placed directly into Turan's hand. But even after that, the workers still could not stop staring at the intact corpse of the monster, unable to hide their shock. When they realized Turan had not turned to leave, they asked in confusion why he was still standing there. Turan answered by asking whether there were any more bounties for monsters that needed killing. That question stunned all of them, and they stared at him in astonishment, asking if he was really planning to keep hunting. A few days later, Lena excitedly prepared a whole table of food for Turan. She had never imagined that someone like him could hunt down 30 monsters in only 3 days. So she could not help asking if he must have made a fortune by now. But Turan calmly answered that money had never been his only goal. To be more exact, what he truly wanted was the magical power inside the monsters. It was thanks to those monsters that he had grown stronger and stronger. Compared to the day he first met Karen, The magical power inside him had already multiplied several times over. Looking down at his own palm, Turan knew in his heart that he had already reached some kind of threshold. If he kept relying only on hunting weak monsters for magical power, then he probably would not be able to grow much stronger from here on. At that moment, Lena's cheeks flushed red as if she wanted to say something to him. But when she looked up, she realized Turan had already eaten through almost everything on the table. He looked lean enough, yet his appetite was absurd. Even the cook in the back seemed delighted, since it had been a long time since anyone had cleaned out such a feast so thoroughly. Just as Turan was getting up to return to his room after finishing his meal, a large hand suddenly seized him by the back of the collar. The owner of that hand looked at him and asked in a mocking tone, "Already done eating? I heard Turan has made quite a bit of money lately, so why not share some of it with everyone else?" Before the man could even finish, Turan whipped around and brought the edge of his palm crashing into the man's face. The man immediately let out a sharp scream. Turan looked at them coldly and said that if they wanted money so badly, then they were welcome to come take it. Another man immediately threw a punch at him, barking that Turan should not get so full of himself. And after slipping past the blow, Turan answered with a heavy punch of his own. That only made the first man even angrier, and he grabbed a stool and tried to smash it straight at Turan. But before the stool could even reach him, Turan blocked it with one hand. Then he lifted his left hand and made a light flicking motion with his fingers. With what looked like nothing more than a flick to the forehead, he sent the man flying across the room. Right at that moment, Lena finally shouted at the top of her lungs, "No fighting inside the inn." Not long after that, Midden came rushing over and apologized to Turan. He said he had already dealt with those two properly, and that something like this would never happen again. In the end, it all came down to the fact that they had been desperate for money lately, so after seeing Turan, they let the wrong thoughts get into their heads. Right after that, Midden dragged the two men over and made them apologize to Turan in person. Hearing that, Turan only calmly asked, "Have things really gotten that bad?" Midden forced out a bitter smile and admitted, "We are only short on money for the moment. But at this rate, in 3 days, we probably will not even be able to afford the inn anymore." The moment he heard that, Turan did not hesitate at all. He simply pulled out a bag of coins and handed it to Midden. That left Midden completely stunned, unable to understand why Turan would do something like that. But Turan only explained that this was repayment for the bit of kindness Midden had shown him before. After all, Midden had once said he was worried about Turan's safety and had even wanted to bring him along. Midden had been about to ask how Turan even knew that, but before he could, Turan cut him off and said flatly, "There is no such thing as a free meal in this world, so you can pay me back with information instead." Hearing that, Midden did not hesitate for even a second. He immediately thumped his chest and said that gathering information was his specialty, and that he would tell Turan everything he knew. A few more days passed just like that, and Turan decided that after this next hunt, he would leave the city behind. Midden had already gathered information for him about the next city, so Turan felt that it was just about time for him to head there. And on top of that, the information Midden had brought him turned out to be even more useful than he had expected. Looking at it that way, Midden really was not a bad person at all. He did not have Karen's experience or polish, but maybe because of that, he felt even more sincere and kind. But right then, Turan's sharp nose caught a strange scent on the air. A sense of unease instantly rose inside him. All he could do was silently hope that his suspicion was wrong. When Turan reached a large tree marked with the claw traces of a monster, he immediately began scanning the surroundings with caution. Then he spotted a blood-covered figure slumped against the trunk, barely hanging there. Turan's expression darkened, because that person was clearly one of the men who had been traveling with Midden. In that instant, he knew his earlier suspicion had become reality after all. Looking at the corpse that had clearly been dead for some time, Turan could not help murmuring under his breath, "What exactly happened here? And where did Midden go?" Just then, another man near a different tree, still clinging to a final breath, began to tremble as he spoke. He forced out only 2 words, "Rabbit." It was a rabbit. Following that man's line of sight, Turan quickly saw the creature in the distance gnawing on a corpse. The monster rabbit was covered all over in coarse, goat-like fur, and even its ears and limbs had sprouted razor-sharp fangs. The sight made Turan's face harden, and instinctively, he grew even more cautious. In the next second, the monster rabbit launched itself straight at him, and Turan instantly threw himself to the side. Yet even while he was still in midair, Turan felt a jolt of shock in his chest. This thing was far too fast. He had nearly been slammed head-on just now. The moment his feet landed again, Turan snapped his shepherd's whip forward. At the same time, He drew his left foot back and settled into a stance heavy with stored force. In the very next instant, the whip lashed out with explosive speed. Several stones shot toward the monster rabbit almost instantly. But with only a few rapid swipes, the creature shattered every one of them with ease. Turan's heart sank. He had never expected this thing to be not only monstrously fast, but also so skilled at defending itself against incoming attacks. At that moment, the monster rabbit lifted one of its legs slightly, clearly gathering power for another burst. In the next instant, it launched itself at Turan again. But what it never expected was this. Turan instantly vanished from spot. By the time the creature forcefully halted its charge, Turan had already appeared behind it and swung his short blade. The knife sank straight into its neck in one vicious strike. Then Turan pushed off immediately and retreated at high speed. And just as he disappeared once again into the sand and dust, the monster rabbit suddenly lunged into the exact place where he had been standing a moment earlier. Razor-sharp claws tore through a tree trunk and split it clean in half. After that, it went mad, lashing out again and again with the exact same savage attack as before. In only a few breaths, the dense stretch of woodland had been shredded open into a massive gap. Yet even after all that, it still could not catch the slightest trace of Turan, and in the end it could only throw back its head and release a furious shriek. But as blood kept pouring out from the massive wound in its neck, the monster rabbit finally staggered and collapsed, unable to rise again. Only then did Turan's figure slowly reappear in the distance. He carefully observed the creature for a moment, then raised his palm toward it as a clear intention formed in his mind. In the next second, a stream of energy rose from the corpse and flowed directly into his hand. The magical power he absorbed this time was completely different from what he had taken before. It was far greater even than the power from the panther-like monster he had first encountered. Just then, however, a weak voice suddenly sounded beside him. The man said in disbelief that he never expected Turan to be a wizard too. But if that was the case, why had he hidden his strength all this time? Turan did not bother explaining. He only asked, with a trace of regret, whether any of the four of them had belongings that needed to be returned to their families. But the man only muttered that there was no need, and then he slowly stopped breathing. Looking at Midden's corpse lying before him, Turan could not help remembering something Midden had told him earlier. Midden had said that nearby there was a great city called Orem, and in that city stood a place known as the library. According to him, that library contained tens of thousands of books, but it was not somewhere just anyone could walk into. Midden had said that only wizards were allowed inside. At the time, Turan had still been wondering whether it was truly worth going there, but now he had made up his mind. He would go to the great city Midden had once spoken of, Orem, and just like that, the big man who had once shown kindness even to a stranger was gone. That left Turan with a faint but lingering sense of regret. He could only hope Midden had found peace wherever he had gone. A few days later, Turan arrived at a new place and stood in a long line, waiting to enter the city. There had once been a time when he thought a small city, like Mirai, was already enough to leave him awestruck. But now there was a city before him that shook him far more deeply, and that city was the great city of Orem. Here, even entering the city required standing in line, and the number of people passing through was enormous. Looking at the guards at the gates who were checking for wanted criminals, Turan could not help thinking that this truly was a great city. Even its systems were this strict and complete. But when it was finally Turan's turn, one of the guards suddenly raised a hand and stopped him. The man frowned in disgust and said he had never seen clothes that filthy in his life. If Turan wanted to enter, then he could go clean himself up first. After quite a bit of trouble, Turan finally managed to get himself cleaned up, and only then did he truly step into Orem. Once inside the city, the very first thing he did was search for the library Midden had once mentioned. The building standing before him was so grand that it left him genuinely stunned. He could not help wondering whether the place itself had been built with magic. When he saw the guards posted at the entrance, he walked straight over and said that he wanted to enter. But the guard coldly told him that this was a library only wizards were allowed to enter. Turan calmly replied that he was a wizard. The guard did not believe him for a second. Instead, with open contempt and hostility, he snapped, "How could someone looking like you possibly be a wizard?" He even threatened him, saying, "If you dare impersonate a wizard, I will not let you off lightly." The instant those words left his mouth, a red glow of magical power began gathering in the guard's palm. Yet Turan merely lifted his eyes slightly, and in the very next moment, a far more terrifying pressure spread soundlessly from his body. The guard's face instantly turned ghostly pale, and then he collapsed to the ground on the spot. The other guard beside him hurried over and asked in alarm what had happened. Only then did the man who had questioned Turan finally understand that Turan's strength was at least noble class, and perhaps even beyond that. In sheer panic, he scrambled back up and bowed respectfully, saying that he was an attendant of the Kenawat's family, then cautiously asked which family Turan belonged to. But Turan only asked in return whether stating one's family was required just to pass through the door. The man hurriedly denied it and explained that it was not required. But if Turan wanted to formally use the library, he would still need permission from the Lord of Altas. What Turan had not expected, however, was this. What he had previously heard others describe as getting the Lord of Valtas's permission turned out to be far from a simple formality. Very quickly, the entire situation began unfolding in a way he had never anticipated. Since Turan was not used to being waited on, the moment the maids surrounded him, Turan immediately turned and said to them, "Stop, I can wash and dress myself." But the maids, trembling with fear, explained that if they failed to properly attend to such an honored guest, they would be severely punished. Faced with that, Turan could only agree awkwardly. A short while later, the maids who had just finished attending to him all wore expressions of stunned amazement. Seeing that, Turan could not help asking, "Is there something strange on my face?" But they quickly explained that it was only because Lord Turan was so handsome that they had momentarily lost themselves and begged him to forgive them. Turan, having none of a noble's arrogance, casually told them not to worry about something so small. Right then, a distant door was pushed open. Soon after, two figures began walking toward him. The petite girl among them took one look at Turan as he was now, and could not help teasing. "So you were the guest who looked like a beggar at first. I didn't expect you to actually have a bit of a prince's air after getting cleaned up." Hearing that, Turan introduced himself first, saying his name was Turan. In response, the woman told him her own name was Angela. After that, Angela asked which family Turan came from, but Turan simply said that for personal reasons, he was not in a position to reveal that yet. That left Angela a little disappointed, and she could not help thinking that Turan must be deliberately hiding his true identity. Then, with a light smile, she declared, "Then please allow me to play a little joke." In the very next instant, a powerful wave of magical energy burst out from her body, and it was obvious that she was using it to test just how strong Turan's magic really was. But in no more than an instant, a power equal to Angela's rose from Turan's body as well. The sight made Angela's guard react immediately, stepping in front of the maids at once. Once the two clashing presences finally faded away, Turan let out a long, helpless breath. Yet Angela, instead of backing down, let out a startled cry, clearly unable to believe what she had just felt. Even after several moments had passed, her hand was still trembling. Then, with a smile suddenly playing on her lips, she looked at Turan and asked, "Do you want to just marry me?" That single sentence left Turan completely stunned. When she saw him fall silent, Angela grinned with obvious mischief and said, "I was only joking. Why did you react like that?" Even the guard at her side looked thoroughly helpless. Even so, she still smiled and told Turan to think about it seriously. "After all, the place beside me is still empty." After saying that, she turned and walked away. Only after her figure had gradually disappeared into the distance did Turan finally lower his gaze, only to discover that his own hand, just like hers, was trembling slightly. So Angela's magical power was actually on the same level as his. What Turan did not know was whether that counted as normal among wizards or not. Not long after, Turan was taken to meet the Lord of Aurum, Rud Valtas. Rud Valtas clearly already knew why Turan had come, so the first thing he did was ask for Turan's name. After Turan gave a brief introduction of himself, Rud Valtas told him that many people had come here recently after hearing all sorts of strange rumors. But in truth, there were no astonishing treasures hidden inside the library, nor any secret method that could rapidly increase a person's strength. Turan calmly replied that he had not come for anything like that in the first place. Satisfied with that answer, Rud Valtas readily agreed to let him in. Still, he said it was already late, so Turan should rest for the night and visit the library properly the next day. On the following day, the two guards assigned to protect the library respectfully escorted Turan inside. As the great doors slowly opened, Turan lifted his eyes, and in that instant, he saw the most breathtaking sight of his entire life. At the center of the tower-like library stood a spiraling staircase that wound endlessly upward. It twisted through layers upon layers of towering bookshelves, passed over mountains of stacked volumes, and rose all the way toward the light pouring down from the dome above like a waterfall. The sight drew a quiet breath of awe from Turan. So this is a library. At that very moment, a voice sounded from beside him. The speaker smiled and said, "It is a pleasure to meet you. I am a librarian here." The Lord had already told her about Tehran in advance, so it would be her job to explain the rules for using the place. That immediately made Tehran wonder how someone who looked like such a little girl could possibly be the librarian of a place like this. But she continued as if nothing were strange at all, saying, "Of course, the rules here are actually very simple, and there are only two. First, if anything is damaged, it must be paid for in full. Second, no book may ever be taken out. So during the entire time you use the library, I will be keeping an eye on you." Since she said it so seriously, Tehran did not bother arguing and simply agreed. Still, he could not help adding, "But when I'm actually reading, could you stand a little farther away? Because being watched that closely makes me uncomfortable. Then again, since you're the librarian here, you should know all the books in this place." Hearing Tehran say that, she answered at once with complete confidence. "That's right, finding books is my specialty. If you need anything, you only have to ask. So what exactly do you want? Romantic history? Or, since you're still young, maybe something more erotic?" Tehran fell silent for a moment before calmly telling her, "I just want to start by learning the most basic knowledge about this world." It took only a short while before she returned carrying a towering stack of books for him. She also told Tehran, "Many of the books here are already several hundred years old. I cannot say for sure whether they are perfectly suited to you, but this particular set will probably be enough to help." In response, Tehran sincerely thanked her. After that, he casually pulled one volume from the pile. His fingertips brushed across the rough cover, and a warm yet faintly cool texture made him pause ever so slightly. So this was a book, and once he had read for only a little while, Tehran felt even more strongly that books were something almost unbelievably magical. From that day on, the boy repeated the same routine day after day, quietly remaining inside the library and reading. Book after book, he gradually came to understand the geography of the world, the ways different races lived, the tangled interests of wizards, and the crafting and processing of all kinds of items. He even began to absorb the knowledge of ancient monsters and ruins from the old age, storing it all deep in his mind. As knowledge continued to gather inside him, the world in the boy's eyes slowly began to sharpen. What had once been nothing but a blurred unknown was now being polished clear little by little. Mountains gained names, races gained histories, and even the wind brushing past his face seemed to carry secrets that could finally be understood. When Lord Rugvaltas saw Tehran again, he could not help offering a word of praise, saying that Tehran really had made full use of the library. Since Tehran did not deny it, Rugvaltas continued and said that he hoped Tehran understood something. The reason he had allowed him to use the library was not only because he regarded him as a noble, but also because he had extended a measure of goodwill. Naturally, he hoped that goodwill would be repaid. Hearing that, Tehran calmly asked what exactly he was being asked to do. Rugvaltas then explained that in the northern region of Orem, a monster had appeared that was attacking travelers. He had already sent 4 knights to subdue it, but every last one of them had been devoured. So this time, he needed nobles to intervene personally. Yet at present, the Valtas family only had 2 noble-class fighters they could mobilize, and that was precisely the favor he wanted back from Tehran. As he spoke, Rugvaltas also asked whether Tehran needed any support, but Tehran said he did not need anything extra. Even so, something about the situation still felt off to him, because under normal circumstances, noble-class wizards were not supposed to get dragged into matters like this so easily. Seeing that thoughtful expression on Tehran's face, Rugvaltas explained further. The monster had sealed off the northern road, and that road happened to be Orem's most important trade route. On top of that, the problem had already lasted for 10 full days, so he needed the route reopened as quickly as possible. At that, Tehran understood immediately. 10 days ago, he had not even reached Orem yet. So this was the real reason Rugvaltas had been so quick to let him use the library. By the next day, Tehran was already leaving the gates with a hunting party. At the front, Angela lazily raised both hands and said, "Father really is unusual. He's actually dragging a guest into monster hunting now. Are the rest of them really that unreliable?" After saying that, she looked toward Tehran and added that she was not blaming him. She simply thought her father was making a bigger deal out of it than necessary. The person beside her seemed ready to caution her, but Angela shot him a single glare, and he immediately shut his mouth. Only then did that person turn to Tehran and briefly introduce himself, saying that his name was Marvin Valtas. But just then, Angela idly kicked at a stone near her foot, muttering, "It's best to get this over with quickly so we can head back and rest." At that point, Marvin, who was standing beside Tehran, quietly asked whether Tehran had feelings for his sister. When Tehran answered no without hesitation, Marvin smiled with obvious relief and said that in that case, he could finally relax. Right at that moment, the people in charge of scouting ahead reported that they had found something. When everyone looked over, they saw a shattered carriage abandoned in front of them. The scouts quickly concluded that the monster had probably left it there on purpose, intending to stop anyone from continuing north. After observing the scene for a short while, however, Tehran identified the monster's general nature from a single handprint left on the wreckage. He then told the others directly, "It's a monkey." That answer immediately made Angela frown in confusion. In response, Tehran pointed at the handprint and continued, saying that after attacking the merchants, the creature had most likely returned to the forest. If they followed the trail now, they would probably find it very soon. At present, neither Angela nor Marvin, despite both being wizards, were particularly skilled in tracking magic. So Tehran reached into the wreckage and picked up a piece of cloth, then told them he could give it a try. That immediately caught Angela's attention, and she asked whether this was a trait of the Zasher bloodline. Tehran only answered calmly that he was simply good at tracking. He had done it many times, so naturally he had become skilled at it. After saying that, Tehran raised the piece of cloth to his nose. In a single instant, he locked onto the scent trail left by the monster. Then he raised a hand and pointed in one direction, calmly telling the others to go that way. Not long after, when the group reached the edge of a stream, Tehran spoke again and said that the monster had stopped there for a while and had probably washed its body as well. Hearing that, Angela looked genuinely surprised. Was a monster really capable of doing something like that just to throw off pursuers? Tehran answered calmly that maybe it had not been trying to avoid pursuit at all. Maybe it had simply felt like taking a bath. Then, in that exact moment, Tehran suddenly snapped his head toward the rear and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Behind the tree, watch your backs." In the next second, a gigantic monkey-like monster let out a furious roar, scooped up a huge handful of stones, and just as the soldiers started panicking and trying to dodge, it hurled them forward in an instant. In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 soldiers were killed on the spot by that attack alone. Tehran himself moved just as quickly, slipping away from the rain of stone in time. Once the chaos had passed, he immediately turned to look toward where Angela had been standing. What he saw made his eyes harden. Marvin and Angela had each used the bodies of nearby soldiers as shields to block the attack. And after that, they tossed those bodies aside like worthless trash. That sight only strengthened what Tehran had already begun to suspect. His mother really had been right after all. At that moment, Angela shouted for everyone else to attack at once. The surviving soldiers raised their weapons and charged the monkey without hesitation. But before they could reach it, the creature spun around and bolted toward the rear. Seeing that, Angela and Marvin immediately rushed after it. But the monkey was simply too fast, and neither of them could keep up. Then suddenly, Angela froze when something shot past at incredible speed. It was a small stone fired from the very back of the group. In the next instant, that stone punched straight through the monkey's chest. The sight made both Angela and Marvin instinctively turn to look behind them. And standing there, holding his whip with a cold expression on his face, was Tehran. Seeing the chilling calm in Tehran's eyes at that moment, Angela finally seemed to snap back to herself. Then she slowly raised her right hand and softly spoke a single word, "Fire." In an instant, blazing flames surged from every part of her body and gathered in her palm. A moment later, that burning mass twisted into the shape of a giant flaming serpent and lunged at the badly wounded monkey. With a low explosive roar, the sea of fire swallowed the monkey whole. Watching that unfold, Tehran could not help thinking that this must be the fire demon bloodline of the Voltas family. Seeing the monster consumed at last, the remaining soldiers finally let out long breaths of relief. Was it finally over? Right then, Angela suddenly turned and looked at Tehran. Half complaining, half amazed, she said that the stone that had shot past them just now had nearly scared all of them into breaking out in goosebumps. At that, Marvin immediately teased her and asked if his sister had actually been scared. Angela told him to shut up on the spot and shot back that the one who had squealed like a little girl had clearly been Marvin instead. Meanwhile, the soldiers had already begun tending to themselves where they stood. That last attack from the monster had left every one of them badly injured, and some had even lost an entire arm. Looking at the miserable scene in front of him, Tehran thought to himself that they had still been lucky this time. At least it had not turned into a disaster with mass casualties. The only ones who had truly died were the 2 soldiers Angela and Marvin had used as shields. At that thought, Tehran found himself glancing back at the siblings again. Wizards, by nature, had bodies far stronger than ordinary soldiers. and yet the two of them had still used weaker people as shields without a second thought. So this was exactly the sort of thing his mother had always warned him about. At that moment, Marvin seemed to notice the look in Tehran's eyes and asked him, "What's wrong?" Tehran only shook his head and calmly said it was nothing. Hearing that, Angela called out and told Tehran to come over and absorb the magical power with them. The three of them then extended their hands toward the blackened remains of the monster. As Tehran began drawing in the magical power still lingering in the corpse, he finally understood that what he had read in those books had all been true. Just as the books described, even if multiple people absorbed magical power from a corpse at the same time, the total amount left behind did not weaken in the slightest. Before long, Angela and Marvin both reached their own limits for absorption, and when they turned to look at Tehran, who was still continuing without pause, they finally understood why their father had specifically wanted him to come along. The level of magic he had shown earlier, along with the reserve of magical power that could stand on equal footing with Angela's, was already astonishing enough. What was even more terrifying was that Tehran clearly had not yet reached the upper limit of his growth. By the time the sun had begun to sink and evenings settled over the land, the group finally returned to Orum's territory. On the way back, Marvin spoke up and said that if Tehran had not been there, they never would have been able to kill that monster. From the very beginning, whether it was the tracking or the stone strike that brought the creature down, Tehran had been the key factor every step of the way. But Tehran only waved the praise off and said it was nothing special. The one thing he really regretted was realizing the truth too late and letting that thing seize the initiative first, because he even had not expected the monster to possess tracking abilities. That made Marvin pause in confusion. Tracking abilities? Tehran then explained that the external features a monster showed could often reveal the type of abilities it had awakened. The monkey they had just killed had displayed enormous hands and red eyes, both of which were far removed from its original form. So Tehran concluded that the creature had most likely awakened something like a power-based throwing ability, along with a kind of vision that allowed it to observe over long distances or even see through the forest itself. That made Marvin look genuinely surprised. He found it hard to believe that Tehran had managed to figure all of that out in such a short time. To this, Tehran only answered calmly, "In truth, I simply found a book about monsters in the library." That left both of them momentarily stunned. Who would willingly spend time in a place as dull and stifling as the library? Angela had gone there once before, but that was only out of momentary curiosity. The books inside were so dense and difficult that she had not even made it through half a volume before leaving because she could no longer stand it. Seeing that, Tehran told them, "If you get the chance again, you should just ask the librarian directly. Maybe she can help you find some books that are easier to understand." But the moment she heard the title, Librarian, confusion flickered across Angela's face. She rubbed her chin and thought seriously for a while before asking Tehran hesitantly, "Does someone like that really exist in the library?" Not long afterward, Tehran returned to the library once more. The instant he pushed the door open, the librarian greeted him with bright excitement. "Welcome back, Tehran." It was only at that moment that Tehran suddenly realized he might have been taking things far too lightly before. After all, whether knight or commoner, no one in a place like this would casually address a noble by their first name. In Orum, the most basic way to address someone of noble standing should have been an honorific like Honored Lord. And yet the little creature in front of him did not seem like any ordinary librarian at all. So Tehran decided to ask her directly how she knew his name. When she heard Tehran ask that, a faintly meaningful smile curled at the corner of her mouth, and she leaned back lightly against the edge of the desk. Only after that did she ask him in a teasing tone, "Are you really just noticing this now?" She then told him that she had learned his name from his permit, and that as long as he remained within the bounds of the library, there was almost nothing that escaped her sight. Hearing that, Tehran asked how exactly he was supposed to address her. She replied that she did not really have a true name, so he could call her whatever he liked. If he wanted, he could even choose a cuter title for her, like Tehran's beloved. Tehran, however, answered without changing expression, "In that case, I will just keep calling you librarian." That immediately made her complain with obvious dissatisfaction. "Why have you suddenly become so formal? Just a few days ago, you were ordering me around without hesitation, and now you are pushing me away like this. It actually makes me feel a bit awkward." Seeing her suddenly move closer, Tehran instinctively stepped back a few paces and quickly denied ever ordering her around like that. He also asked her not to stand so close because it made him uncomfortable. Then, unable to hold back his curiosity, Tehran asked, "Are you actually a wizard left over from the ancient age?" Hearing that question, she answered quite plainly that she had never been human from the very beginning. To be more exact, she was closer to a kind of soul. If she resided within a living thing, she would become a living being. But if she inhabited something neither truly alive nor truly dead, then she would become something like a ghost. In other words, this entire library was actually her body, and the form she was using now existed only to make conversation with Tehran easier. At its core, this appearance was generated automatically according to the preferences of the visitor. So, based on that, your preferences must be. Yet before she could finish that sentence, Tehran cut her off on the spot and told her not to twist the facts. After saying that, Tehran began studying her more carefully. A moment later, he actually reached his hand directly into her body. That made even her pause in surprise as she asked with obvious confusion, "Where exactly were you touching just now?" It felt weird. Realizing that his action had indeed been somewhat improper, Tehran showed a rare trace of embarrassment and quickly apologized to her. It was precisely this gesture that seemed to make her remember some rather unpleasant things from the past. She told Tehran that he could never truly understand how frustrating it was to exist without being able to touch other people. If she were actually capable of doing that, then she would have punished every careless fool who tried to walk out of the library with a book. Those words immediately confirmed what Tehran had already begun to suspect. So the Voltas family truly did not know about her existence. In fact, it might be more accurate to speak of everyone who had ever used this library. Until now, none of them had ever possessed the qualifications needed to sense her at all. She did not deny that in the slightest, and simply told Tehran that this was the truth. Her creator had placed a restriction on her. Only those whose type had reached a certain level of completeness were capable of seeing her or even noticing her. Then she smiled and asked Tehran whether there was not something romantic about the fact that she could be seen by him alone. But Tehran found the word type deeply confusing and asked what it actually meant. She then explained that it was simply the term wizards used for bloodline. Hearing that, Tehran immediately wanted to press further and ask what his own bloodline really was. At first, she had meant to tell him to go ask his parents, but Tehran calmly told her that he was already an orphan. After hearing Tehran's answer, she slowly licked her lips. Then she said with a smile that if Tehran agreed to let her examine his body, she could take a proper look for him. That line startled Tehran so badly that he instinctively stepped back. But his reaction only made the smile on her face turn even stranger. In the very next moment, she pushed her small hand directly into Tehran's body. While feeling around inside, she muttered a string of bizarre words under her breath that he could not understand at all. After quite a long while, she finally told him that there were some fragmented traces mixed inside him, but the dominant bloodlines were still those of the pursuer and the hunter. So that truly was the defining mark of House Sasher. Yet right after that, she seemed to notice something else and murmured in surprise. So it is a mixed bloodline after all? That only made Tehran more confused, and he immediately asked what mixed was supposed to mean. She then explained that it meant Tehran had been born from two people with different bloodlines. The reason she could not identify the second one was because that portion of his bloodline had been sealed away somehow. She also told him that sealed bloodlines within mixed inheritances were not especially rare. As Tehran continued to grow stronger, that lock part would naturally begin to open on its own. Hearing that, Tehran could not help thinking of his mother. Judging from her manners and upbringing alone, she could never have been a commoner. So she must also have descended from some noble line, though perhaps her blood had thinned to the point where it could no longer even sustain night-level magical power. After finally piecing all of that together, Tehran sincerely thanked her from the bottom of his heart, but she only smiled and replied, "If you truly feel grateful, then you should just stay here another month." Once he learned the true identity of a library spirit, Tehran stopped reading in silence all by himself, and instead began asking her question after question about the contents of the books. To his surprise, she did not find it bothersome in the slightest. If anything, she seemed delighted to answer him. During that time, Tehran gradually came to realize that the librarian knew far more than the library itself seemed to contain. Over the last 1,000 years, nearly every piece of knowledge ever read within those books had been engraved into her mind. To Tehran, that made her an immeasurable treasure. Through her, he came to understand that many diseases were born from microorganisms, and that the decay and rotting of living things were often tied to the spread of bacteria. More than that, in those same days, Tehran also began to grasp some of the most fundamental laws of the world itself. Things like the refraction of light, the way friction generated heat, and the process by which living bodies were wounded and healed. Once he truly understood these things, a new thought began to take shape in his mind. He wanted to touch the starting point of decay itself. So he slowly raised his hand and lightly touched an apple in front of him with the tip of his finger. In only a few moments, the apple began to rot before his eyes. The sight was so strange that even Turan found it hard to believe. It was not that existing magic could not produce similar results, but if he truly understood the principles behind it, then the cost of using magic could be reduced dramatically. The world he now saw was completely different from the one he had seen before, and that change alone had quietly elevated his ability as a wizard. That was what made Turan realize why powerful houses were so desperate to monopolize knowledge. If every wizard understood these things, then their old advantages would begin to collapse. Turan's words seemed to awaken something in the librarian as well. In a quiet voice, she said that it was no wonder people's level of understanding had steadily declined as time passed. Then Turan calmly told her that it was probably time for him to leave. The master of this land had been making that suggestion more and more openly lately, and it was clear that Turan was being encouraged to move on. At that, the librarian immediately began making a scene, even demanding that Turan take her with him. Looking at the way she flopped dramatically onto the floor, Turan could not help asking whether she was truly capable of leaving the library at all. She admitted that she was not. She simply wanted him to stay. If he refused to leave, she promised she would take very good care of him. But Turan still turned down her request, and that made her fly off to the side in obvious anger. After that, she told him that this land still held many ruins of the gods. If he had the chance, he should go and look around. Perhaps in those places, he might even encounter spirits who knew more than she did. Then Turan slowly pushed open the library doors and looked back to tell her, "I will return someday." She did not even turn around. Instead, she only said in a cool voice, "Come back if you want, stay away if you don't." Hearing that, Turan answered with a faint smile, "Don't worry. After all, I still have far too many books left unread." And so, Turan finally left that vast city behind. According to the map he had studied in the library, the territory of House Zasher lay within the Imbir Desert. That land stood to the east of Orem, and it would be Turan's next destination, because there, he meant to search for clues about his parents. And so, the shepherd boy set out on his journey once again. Even so, Turan did not let himself grow impatient over it. If those clues were truly meant to vanish, then they would have already disappeared completely sometime during the past 18 years. And if the people tied to those clues were still alive, then they were not going to be erased from existence just because Turan arrived a little late. He had no idea how long he had been walking when a sudden sound pulled his attention away. It was the cry of a horse. When Turan parted the grass and looked toward the source of the noise, he saw a strong, well-built horse standing protectively over someone lying on the ground. Facing that horse were two figures with purple skin and snow-white hair. One of them spoke with open mockery in his voice. "What a pain. For a mere beast, it is quite a bit of strength. Looks like we will have to find a way through first." As he said that, he slowly spread his fingers, and a strange purple magical aura began to gather in his hand. That eerie magic made the corpses lying nearby begin to twitch and move once again. The moment Turan saw that, he immediately understood. These two were most likely dark elves, and what they had just used was almost certainly the necromancy he had once read about in the books. Even so, Turan hesitated for a brief moment, unsure whether he should step in at all. He had no way of knowing whether the fallen person had attacked the dark elves first, or whether they had attacked him first. But while Turan was still weighing that question, one of the dark elves suddenly grabbed a severed arm and shoved it into his mouth, chewing without the slightest hesitation. The female dark elf beside him casually asked, "Whose arm is that? Give me one too." But the male dark elf, still chewing, refused and mumbled, "Didn't you already grab one earlier?" That sight made Turan's heart turn cold. So they were cannibals. In the very next second, he activated his concealment, just as the female dark elf was still complaining in disgust. "Human men are all so hairy. It really ruins the appetite." A stone tore through the air and instantly shattered the head of the male dark elf who had been swallowing the flesh. Purple blood exploded outward and splashed across the female dark elf's face and body. At the same moment, the undead beast the male dark elf had summoned collapsed into a puddle of black sludge. That sudden turn of events wiped away every trace of calm from the female dark elf. In an instant, she pulled all the undead beasts being controlled by her necromancy back to her side. Right after that, another stone came screaming through the air. But this time, the projectile was blocked by the horn of a goat-like undead beast. At once, the female dark elf commanded all of her undead creatures to charge toward the direction the stone had come from. With a thunderous crash, a bull-like undead beast smashed the trees ahead into splinters, but no one was there. Seeing that, The female dark elf immediately realized that Turan had already hidden himself, and the thought sent her into a rage. In the next moment, she cast her necromancy again and summoned another beast, this one a grotesque thing shaped like a mass of sludge, whether by smell or by some far stranger sense. That creature immediately detected the exact place where Turan was hiding. The discovery made the female dark elf scream at once. "I found you at last, you damned demon." Right after that, the female dark elf immediately sent the remaining undead beasts charging toward Turan. Turan threw both hands wide, and in that instant, a massive surge of fire began gathering in his palms. A heartbeat later, the blazing force exploded straight out in front of him. But the only thing truly engulfed by the flames was the sludge-like beast. The bull-like undead creature, on the other hand, barreled through the lingering heat and came crashing straight at Turan. That forced him to dive aside at once, and his heart sank. These creatures were far more troublesome than he had expected. It was a good thing he had already killed the male dark elf earlier. But right then, a sharp burst of pain shot through his leg, making his whole body jolt. When he twisted around to look, he saw that the sludge beast had latched onto his calf. Without the slightest hesitation, Turan kicked it away with all his strength. But at that same moment, the bull he had barely avoided before charged at him once again. This time there was no room to dodge, and the impact sent Turan flying through the air. The force behind that blow hit him so hard that blood burst from his mouth. And while he lay there gasping for breath, the remaining monsters instantly moved in to finish him off. The female dark elf took one look at Turan's battered state and burst into vicious laughter. She sneered viciously. "This is what you get for daring to kill my kin. I will make sure you beg for death, yet cannot die." But before she could finish speaking, the warhorse that had been protecting its master smashed into her body with a brutal kick. Under the horse's relentless assault, the female dark elf was driven into a panic and even cried out for help. That made the two undead beasts closing in on Turan immediately turn around, redirecting their attack toward the horse instead. The humiliation from a moment ago had clearly pushed the female dark elf into a frenzy. Grinding her teeth, she swore, "I will tear that horse to pieces." But in the very next second, with a dull, cracking sound, a stone punched clean through her skull. The body, no longer supported by its head, crumpled lifelessly to the ground. And with their controller dead, the remaining undead beasts quickly melted away into pools of foul black sludge. Even after the battle ended, though, the bull's charge had left Turan's lower abdomen throbbing with pain, and he could only gasp for air. Dropping to one knee, he barely managed to hold himself upright. Just then, the horse that had fought so fiercely for its master slowly walked over to him. Looking at it, Turan quietly thanked the animal. "Thank you. If you had not stepped in when you did, I truly might have died." By the time night had fully fallen, the master who had been lying protected beneath the horse finally began to wake. But the moment he took an erect battlefield around him, he cried out in shock. Turan, sitting across from the fire, did not make a single unnecessary move. Only after the man finally calmed down a little did he ask in confusion, "Who exactly are you, and why are you here?" When a man asked what had happened, Turan calmly explained that he was the one who had saved him from those dark elves. At that very moment, the warhorse also slowly moved back toward its master. The man's face lit up at once. He reached out to stroke the horse and softly called its name, merrily. Seeing the horse come over, Turan also gave it sincere praise, saying that it was remarkably intelligent. It had not only protected its master, but had even known to move him to a safer position. After that, the man introduced himself as someone from the Burke family, while Turan gave his own name in return. After a short exchange, Akais began telling his story, his gratitude obvious in every word. Before long, Turan asked him how exactly he had ended up in conflict with those dark elves in the first place. Akais explained that he had been traveling with his accompanying knights and servants when those creatures suddenly attacked without warning. He had heard before that some of the other races could be cruel, but he had never expected things to become that vicious. As he said that, tears began streaming down his face. Once his emotions finally settled a little, he apologized to Turan for losing control like that, saying that it was only because he had lost the people most important to him. That made Turan ask whether the dead were his family. Akais shook his head and said no. They were the knights and servants who had watched him grow up, cared for him, and raised him from childhood. Those words caught Turan off guard. So there really were nobles who cared about the lives of ordinary people. Right after that, Turan continued by asking how many dark elves had attacked him in total. At the same time, he added that he had already killed 2 of them. After hesitating for a moment, Akai's answered that those should have been all of them. Hearing that, Turan slowly closed his eyes and used his own ability to search the surrounding area. A moment later, he confirmed that there were indeed no other dark elves nearby. Only then did Akai's, in a heavy voice, ask whether Turan had some urgent mission he needed to attend to. Turan calmly replied that he was simply traveling for now. That clearly puzzled Akai's. Someone as strong as Turan should, by all logic, have come from a distinguished noble house. So why had he chosen to travel alone? But Turan only shook his head and said that he was not as powerful as Akai's imagined. In that battle, he had merely caught one of them off guard and killed him first, then struggled against the second one afterward. And even then, he had only managed to win because the red horse stepped in when it did. After saying that, Turan openly revealed his magical power. Akai's, though still uncertain, released his own magic as well. As the two currents of magical power met head-on, Turan finally realized that Akai's was actually stronger than he was. If he had not absorbed the magical power of those two dark elves earlier, then he would never have been able to compare with Akai's at all. Akai's, meanwhile, was equally shocked that Turan had managed to deal with two dark elf necromancers at once. More than that, Turan's magical power could stand on equal footing with his own. That could only mean Turan either possessed extraordinary combat talent or some exceptionally rare bloodline. Even so, Akai still could not understand why someone like Turan would choose to travel alone. In the end, he made Turan a serious offer. If you have not yet chosen a place to belong, would you be willing to join the Burke family? If you escort me safely back to my household, I promise I will repay both the debt for saving my life and the debt for avenging my people. After all, the Burke family served as vassals to the greatest northern house, the House of Abien, while the Burke family itself was an old line of enchanting craftsmen who had forged magical items for generations. If Turan agreed, then the Burke family would personally create a magical item crafted specifically for him.